You help again, even though a part of you knows you don't want to.
Right.
You agree to stay late, to take on the extra project, to sort of smooth over the tension at the dinner table. You feel that familiar tightness in your chest, a quiet resentment building, but the word yes is out of your mouth before you can even think.
It's automatic.
Completely automatic.
Yeah.
And this is the moment your own needs just evaporate. And there are two honest ways to read this, really. Like, is this simply who you are, a deeply caring, reliable person whose empathy is, your superpower?
Yeah.
Or is it a survival reflex, your body bracing for danger if you dare to choose yourself?
And it's a really profound divergence. Because when
That's
you are
right.
standing in that exact moment, when that tiny instant of agreement just escapes your lips, it feels entirely like a moral choice.
Right, it feels like you're doing the right thing.
Exactly. It feels like you are consciously choosing to be the good person, the one who keeps the peace, the one who, absorbs the friction so nobody else has to deal with it.
Yeah.
But if we pull back and look at that exact same microsecond through the lens of your nervous system, it's not a conscious choice at all. It is a biological prediction based on incredibly old data.
Wow.
Your body is stepping in to manage what it perceives as a threat before your conscious thinking mind even has time to register what is actually happening in the room.
And yet that lived experience, like the deeply felt, visceral reality of it, is that you are holding the world together.
Mm-hmm.
You love fiercely, and you're the one who keeps the plate spinning.
Mm-hmm.
You're the one who walks into a room, notices when someone else's plate is starting to wobble, and you immediately, dive across the room to catch it before it shatters.
You don't even think about it.
Never. So let's ground this in a real scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at what this actually looks like on a random Tuesday,
Yeah.
because it rarely looks like a cinematic emergency.
Right. It's usually very quiet.
Exactly. There's this story in our sources from Annie Wright's clinical work that captures the absolute quietness of this dynamic perfectly. It's about a woman named Camille.
Oh, this story is so good.
It really is. So it's 7:17 p.m. She is standing in the cereal aisle of the grocery store. The fluorescent lights are buzzing. She is just exhausted.
Yeah.
She has been managing people all day at work. She is pushing this heavy cart with a squeaky wheel, and her body is practically screaming for a hot shower and just silence. And then her phone rings.
Oh.
And it's her mother.
And her mother isn't calling with a massive crisis?
Right, no. The mother is calling to talk about a minor, totally non-urgent health anxiety.
Yeah.
Like, she read something on the internet, she has a slight tickle in her throat, and she is just spiraling into worry.
Classic.
Yeah. Now, Camille is standing near a young couple in the produce section who are laughing, throwing apples into their basket, radiating this unhurried lightness.
Just a normal evening for them.
Right. And Camille feels this sharp, cold thing move through her chest. It's this incredibly tight, braided feeling of intense longing to just hang up the phone and a heavy, suffocating obligation to stay on the line.
That tension is so physical.
It is. But she doesn't examine that feeling. She can't. I mean, there's literally no time to process it. She just grips the plastic handle of the shopping cart until her knuckles go white, takes a shallow breath, and says, "Okay, Mom, don't worry. I'll look up the symptoms, and I'll call the doctor for you first thing tomorrow."
Wow.
And right then, the colorful cereal boxes just blur slightly in her vision, and this familiar leaden weight settles right back into her shoulders.
And the thing is, if you were walking past her in the store, you would see absolutely nothing wrong.
Nothing at all.
A woman talking to her mother, a completely ordinary moment. Nothing about it looks like a traumatic event, No one in that grocery store is looking at Camille and thinking she is in a state of deep distress, or that her nervous system is in overdrive.
But she is. Because she wasn't handed a chore chart when she was growing up, right?
Right.
She was handed a role. She learned how to read the emotional weather of a room before she ever learned how to read a book.
Yeah.
She knew by the sound of the key turning in the front door whether she needed to be perfectly silent, overtly cheerful, or immediately helpful.
Which brings us to the actual clinical reality of what we are looking at in that cereal aisle. We call it parentification.
Parentification.
Right, because when we talk about trauma in our culture, we are almost entirely conditioned to expect a dramatic event. We look for a car crash, a physical assault, a loud, undeniable explosion of the family unit. But parentification is silent.
So silent.
It is the insidious, creeping reality of a child being slowly pushed into developmentally inappropriate adult roles. It happens when the fundamental hierarchy of the family structure just collapses.
So the kid isn't just doing the dishes.
No, the child in the scenario doesn't just do extra chores or help with younger siblings. The child functionally, emotionally becomes the parent. Meanwhile, the actual adult parent occupies the emotional position of the child.
Wow.
Camille wasn't just helping her mother schedule an appointment. She was acting as the emotional load-bearing wall for her mother's entirely unmanaged anxiety.
I think we need to look at a classic family dynamic to really map out how this happens,
Mm.
because it's rarely just one parent and one child, is it?
No, it's a whole ecosystem.
Right. Let's take a composite family structure that shows up constantly in the literature. Let's imagine a family where the father, we'll call him Michael, is either physically absent, chronically overworked, or emotionally volatile. He withdraws.
Okay, pretty common setup.
Yeah. And the mother, Martha, instead of turning to her partner or adult peers for support, turns to her children. She becomes emotionally fragile, constantly overwhelmed, sharing adult burdens, financial stress, or her marital unhappiness with her kids.
It's just way too much for a kid.
Way too much. And then there was a younger sibling, Amy, who was just a little kid, oblivious and vulnerable.
Right.
If you were the older child in that house, what do? You step into the vacuum. You realize very quickly, well, if Michael withdraws, Martha spirals. If Martha spirals, the house becomes chaotic and unsafe, and Amy gets scared.
So you start doing the math.
Exactly. At 9 years old, you figure out the algorithm. You manage Michael's moods to keep him from blowing up or leaving, which keeps Martha stable, which protects Amy.
And it is a stunning display of systemic intelligence for a 9-year-old. I mean, you are fundamentally managing the entire emotional supply chain of a household.
The emotional supply chain, I like that.
But the cost is absolute, because while you are busy managing Michael, stabilizing Martha, and protecting Amy, the one person whose developmental needs are completely abandoned is you. You cease to be a child and become a crisis manager.
So we really have to name this tension because it follows you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
It is the burden of benevolence, or one of our sources refers to as the overthinker's dilemma.
Overthinker's dilemma, yeah.
It is this excruciating, daily, unrelenting pull between keeping the peace, like accommodating every single person around you, and maintaining any sense of a sovereign, separate self. It is the agonizing tension between being the ultimate safe harbor for everyone else
Right.
and waking up one day to realize you have absolutely no safe harbor for yourself.
It is a profound tension, and it deserves to be validated completely. Because when you are standing in that cereal aisle or sitting in a boardroom agreeing to take on a project you don't have time for, it feels like an emotional choice. It feels like love or dedication or loyalty.
Yeah, you think you're just being a team player.
Right, but it is deeply biological. It is a patterned protection response from a nervous system that learned very early on that someone else's discomfort is a direct threat to your safety. If you like sitting with questions that don't resolve easily, you're in the right place.
I want to really unpack the felt side of this first before we get into the biology. Let's talk about what it actually feels like to carry this. Annie Wright uses this brilliant concept of the invisible backpack. When you grow up in that parentified role, in that Michael, Martha, and Amy dynamic, you are essentially handed a massive, heavy backpack. And because you are a child, you don't question it. You just open it up and start filling it.
Just take on the load.
Right. You put in Martha's health anxieties. You pack in Michael's unspoken anger. You shove in Amy's need for protection. And the wild, tragic thing is, you carry this backpack for decades. At 40 years old, that backpack doesn't get any lighter. You just keep repacking it with new items that happen to look like adult responsibilities.
The items change shape, but the psychological weight is identical. The physiological urgency is exactly identical.
Yeah. You pack it with your boss's stress over the quarterly numbers. You pack it with your partner's insecurity about their career. You pack it with a subtle, unspoken tension in your friend group's group chat.
Oh, group chats are the worst for this.
Right. And all of these adult, everyday responsibilities land on your nervous system with childhood-sized urgency. Because to the chronic people pleaser, to the person carrying this immense burden of benevolence, a request is never just a request.
It feels like life or death.
Yes. There is a metaphor for this in the Serrata Journal piece that hit me incredibly hard. It's the cliff metaphor. To you, because of how you were wired. Every time someone asks for a favor or expresses a need or even just sighs heavily in the next room, it feels like they are hanging by their fingernails off the edge of a cliff.
That's intense.
And saying no, just setting a simple basic boundary like, hey, I can't do that tonight, feels synonymous with walking over to the cliff edge, prying their fingers off the rock one by one, and watching them fall to their death.
Which perfectly explains the visceral, sickening guilt you feel when you even think about saying no.
Yes.
Because if you fundamentally believe that a coworker or a parent is bangling over a precipice, setting a boundary isn't just socially uncomfortable, it feels like an act of violence.
Yeah.
It feels like you are committing a moral crime. Your body reacts as if you have just committed murder.
Okay, I hear that, but I have to push back on this right here. Because the psychological framing always makes it sound like this is just all in our heads, like it's an overreaction. But what if they are falling? I think about that family dynamic we just built. Sometimes our care, our hypervigilance, our constant exhausting overfunctioning. It is literally the only load-bearing wall holding a family or a workplace together.
I see what you're saying.
It's like being the only person in an actively collapsing house who has a wrench and a hammer. If you are a 9-year-old and you decide, hey, I'm just going to set a boundary and go play outside, Martha has a breakdown, Michael screams, and Amy is traumatized.
Right.
The house actually falls. So how do you tell someone at 40 to just put the tools down? If you stop holding the ceiling up, doesn't the ceiling fall?
That is the exact fear. And I want to be very clear about this. Your assessment of your childhood is completely accurate. The house was falling. Your intervention did save the family system from collapsing. The tools were necessary.
Okay, so it wasn't made up.
Not at all. But this is where we have to bridge your felt experience with the psychological research, specifically Aaron Beck's concept of catastrophizing. The issue is not that you were wrong then. The issue is that your nervous system is projecting that exact same structural collapse onto the present moment.
I see.
Your nervous system is telling you that if you don't answer your boss's email at 11:00 p.m., the ceiling of your entire career is going to collapse. It is telling you that if you tell your mother you can't research her throat tickle, she is going to fall off a cliff.
Right.
But the reality, the objective structural reality of the present day is that most of these askers are actually standing on solid ground. Your boss will survive until 9:00 a.m. Your mother is a fully capable adult who can dial a doctor's office. If you say no, they will not fall to their death.
And just be slightly annoyed.
Exactly. They will just have to experience the mild discomfort of finding their own wrench and hammer. Catastrophizing is a cognitive distortion where the mind immediately jumps to the worst possible life-threatening conclusion because it is operating on old survival software. It's applying a 30-year-old solution to a modern non-lethal problem.
But calling it a cognitive distortion feels so, I don't know, academic, almost dismissive. Because when I'm in that moment, it doesn't feel like a thought I can just reframe with logic. It feels like a physical takeover. My throat tightens, my stomach drops, my heart races. It feels so real in the body.
It feels real in the body because it is happening in the body long before it happens in your cognitive brain. Let's look at the biological mechanics of this, specifically the enteric nervous system. We often refer to it colloquially as the second brain or the gut brain.
The gut brain, yeah.
You have a complex bundle of over 100 million neurons lining your entire digestive tract. To put that in perspective, that is more neurons than a cat has in its entire brain just wrapped around your gut.
Wait, really? A whole cat brain in my stomach?
Basically, yes. And this system operates semi-independently from your conscious mind, and its primary job is scanning your environment for threats.
Okay.
And here's the crucial piece of neurobiology that changes how we understand this entirely. The vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the information superhighway connecting your gut to your brainstem, and 90% of the traffic on the vagus nerve travels upward, from the gut to the brain, not the other way around.
Wait, I need to make sure I understand the mechanics of this. We usually think of the brain as the CEO giving orders to the body. You're saying 90% of the communication is the stomach giving information to the head.
Exactly. Your gut feels unsafe first. Let's break down how that happens. The vagus nerve is directly tied to your cranial nerves, which control your facial muscles, your vocal cords, and your hearing. So, you are sitting in a room, and your partner lets out a heavy sigh, or their jaw tightens by a millimeter. Your auditory and visual systems pick up that microexpression. Before you even have time to form a conscious thought like, oh, my partner seems stressed, your neuroception, your body's subconscious threat detection system, instantly drops your heart rate and sends a massive alarm signal up from your gut to your brain.
That explains the stomach dropping feeling.
Completely. Your stomach drops, your chest tightens. You aren't consciously deciding to be anxious. You aren't sitting there philosophically choosing to be a people pleaser. Your gut is screaming at your brain, we are unsafe, the environment is unstable,
Right.
And your conscious brain, which is always trying to make sense of your physical sensations, scrambles to create a story that justifies that intense feeling.
So the brain says, well, I feel terrified, Therefore, this sigh must mean my relationship is ending unless I fix it immediately.
Precisely. And this intense upward biological signaling leads directly to what we call the fawn response. We are all familiar with the classic survival responses, right? Fight, flight, and freeze. If a tiger walks into the room, you fight it, you run away, or you freeze and hope it doesn't see you.
Right.
But fawning is a highly specialized evolutionary survival reflex. It is an active, socially engaged defense mechanism. When you fawn, your body decides that fighting or fleeing will only enrage the threat, and freezing won't protect you.
So what do?
You appease the threat by becoming completely compliant, excessively helpful, and entirely self-effacing. You attempt to disarm the predator by abandoning your own needs and hyper-focusing on regulating their emotional state.
This completely changes the definition of being nice. People always say, oh, she's just such a nice person. But if she's in a fawn response, she isn't being nice. She's negotiating a hostage situation.
That is exactly what it is, a hostage negotiation. Let's look at the neurochemistry of it. When someone goes into a freeze response, they are in a state of dorsal vagal shutdown. The body floods with endogenous opioids, endorphins, to physically numb them to the pain of the impending attack. They shut down.
They just go numb.
Right. But fawning is different. Fawning utilizes the ventral vagal complex, the part of the nervous system responsible for social connection, but it hijacks it for survival. Your body might release oxytocin to encourage bonding and appeasement, not out of love, but out of a desperate need to pacify the person in front of you.
It is wild.
You are entirely abandoning your own sovereign self to regulate the other person's nervous system because your childhood data tells you that if they are dysregulated, you are in literal physical danger.
So to pull an analogy from the text that bridges this gap between the childhood reality and the adult distortion, it's like a smoke detector.
Yes, great analogy.
Imagine a smoke detector that was installed and calibrated during an actual raging kitchen fire when you were 7 years old. The fire was real. The heat was real. The danger of the house burning down was absolute reality.
It was life or death.
But now, it's 30 years later. You live in a completely different house. And that exact same highly sensitive alarm goes off every single time you just burn a piece of toast. The body perfectly remembers the terror of the original fire, even while the adult mind looks around and tries to logically reframe the burnt toast.
Yes. The implicit memory of that childhood fire is not stored as a narrative story in your mind. It is stored as muscle tension, as digestive issues, as shallow breathing.
Yeah.
When your partner sighs, your conscious mind might know you are just at a safe dinner party, but your body is having a physical flashback. It is responding to an unfinished echo of the past.
Which brings us to the most frustrating part of this entire dynamic.
Yeah.
How this actually plays out in real time with the people in our lives today. Because the tragedy of this, the absolute cruelty of being this reliable, this accommodating, this hypervigilant, is that your benevolence actually becomes the trap.
It really does.
Let's look at a communication framework called expectancy violations theory. Because there's this cruel irony I see all the time. You bend over backwards for years. You are the most reliable person in your office or the most accommodating person in your marriage. You absorb every shock.
Right.
Then one single time you are exhausted and you say, actually, I can't take that on right now. And people look at you like you just committed treason. They are furious. Meanwhile, the guy 2 desks down who's done absolutely nothing for 5 years brings in a box of stale donuts one morning, and everyone thinks he's a saint.
The contrast is ridiculous.
It is. Why is the reliable person punished so harshly for one boundary?
Because you are running straight into expectancy violations theory. This theory posits that humans build strict, unspoken rules and expectations based entirely on your established baseline behavior.
Okay.
If your baseline for the last decade has been to always say yes, always stay late, always anticipate the problem and fix it before anyone asks, you have established that as the normal atmospheric pressure of your relationship. That extreme overfunctioning becomes their baseline expectation of who you are.
You set the bar in the stratosphere.
You did. And when you finally attempt to set a boundary, when you finally say, no, I can't do that today, or I need you to handle this, it is not received as a simple request. It is experienced by the other person as a massive, jarring violation of their expectancy.
So they feel betrayed.
Exactly. You are judged incredibly harshly for that single no because it breaks years of implicit trust that was built on your rigid, unquestioning consistency. To them, you aren't just saying no to a task. You are suddenly becoming unpredictable and unsafe.
While on the flip side, we have the contrast effect.
Right. Think of that colleague with the donuts or a family member who is chronically unhelpful, absent, or entirely selfish. Their baseline is set at the floor.
Hmm.
If they do one small baseline level good deed, they are praised to the heavens. It stands out in sharp, magnificent contrast to their usual terrible behavior.
It is maddening. It is the most crazy-making feeling in the world. You can give 99% of yourself, draining your own life force to keep everything running, and the one time you hold back 1% just to catch your breath, you are treated like a traitor.
Yes.
While someone who gives 1% their entire life is treated like a hero for finally reaching 2%, your reliability literally builds the cage that traps you.
It does build a cage. And this cage becomes incredibly rigid and evident in marriages and long-term partnerships. Sven Masterson's work on relationship dynamics really illuminates the mechanics of this trap.
Oh, his work is so eye-opening on this.
It is. He looks deeply at what happens when the overfunctioning, highly accommodating partner finally hits a wall, realizes they are drowning, and decides they need to grow, to individuate, and to start setting boundaries.
And let's be honest about what happens when you do that. You think your partner's going to be thrilled that you are finally taking care of yourself. But they aren't. They resist it.
They resist it heavily, and often subconsciously. Because the partner has gotten very, very comfortable with the architecture of the dynamic, Masterson points out a very uncomfortable truth about long-term relationships. Partners often want the fruit of your transformation, but they despise the messy process required to get there.
Well, they want the result without the work.
Right. They will say they want you to be confident, grounded, and decisive. They might even complain that you are too anxious or too eager to please. But when you actually start practicing that confidence, when you stop managing their emotions for them, when you stop asking for permission to spend time alone, when you start being predictable, it terrifies their nervous system.
Because things are changing.
Their body reads your sudden autonomy as a threat to the stability of the entire system.
Because the stability of the relationship was built entirely on your suppression.
Exactly. Masterson uses a brilliant structural framework to help people navigate this resistance. He divides the psychological space of a relationship into 3 distinct domains: me, she, he, and we.
Okay, me, she, and we.
Right. In a healthy relationship, these domains have clear borders. But when a relationship is enmeshed, when insecurity and codependency are running the show, the boundaries between these domains completely collapse.
So they blur together.
Worse than blur. What happens is the insecure partner starts to label me decisions, things that belong solely to you, like your personal growth, your dietary choices, your internal convictions, or your need for an hour of quiet time as we decisions. They demand a vote, a veto, or constant consultation on things that belong absolutely and solely to your sovereign self.
This brings up a distinction that I think is one of the most critical things we can unpack for anyone trying to extract themselves from this dynamic. It's the difference between privacy and secrecy.
Oh, that is so important.
Because when you start setting these ME boundaries, when you stop over-explaining every thought you have, or when you decide to go for a walk without leaving a detailed itinerary, the enmeshed partner often panics and accuses you of keeping secrets.
All the time.
They say you're pulling away, you're hiding things, you're being deceptive. And if you are a people pleaser, that accusation of deceit crushes you and you immediately cave.
Right.
But there's a massive structural difference between a secret and a private boundary.
A vital difference. Let's define them clearly. Secrecy is inherently manipulative. It steals agency from the other person.
Why?
Secrecy is when you intentionally withhold information that has real, tangible consequences for your partner's life and their ability to make informed choices. Hiding shared finances, having an affair, making unilateral decisions that obligate their time or their resources without their consent, that is secrecy. That is a betrayal because it removes their ability to consent to the reality of their own life.
But privacy. Privacy isn't a betrayal at all.
No, privacy is the sovereign space required for a human being to remain a self. It is oxygen. Privacy is where your internal growth happens. It's where your discernment forms before you are ready to share it.
Yeah.
Just because your partner feels anxious that you are doing your own inner work, or that you are talking to a therapist, or that you simply want to sit on the porch alone for 20 minutes, does not mean you are keeping a secret. In highly enmeshed relationships, the insecure partner's definition of impact expands to an absurd degree. They begin to treat their own internal emotional discomfort as a tangible harm you have committed against them.
That is such a profound manipulation. Like, you made a choice for yourself. It didn't actually impact our shared life, but it made me feel anxious, therefore you betrayed me. That is reality switching.
It absolutely is.
And that leads us into the darker, more insidious side of this dynamic. because if you are just dealing with an anxious partner, you can usually work through it. But what happens when this fawning, highly accommodating, hyper-empathetic pattern attracts someone who isn't just insecure but is actively manipulative? What happens when this specific nervous system profile encounters narcissistic abuse?
This is where the tension transforms from a difficult burden into a psychological trap. Narcissistic or highly manipulative individuals are incredibly adept at spotting someone who struggles with boundaries and who operates from a fawn response.
They can just sense it.
They can, and they don't usually start with massive abuse. They test the waters with small, unreasonable asks. And when your nervous system kicks in and you accommodate them to keep the peace, they escalate.
Because they know you'll bend.
Right. And because your biology is wired to avoid conflict and rupture at all costs, you stay and you accommodate the escalation. This creates a state of massive, paralyzing cognitive dissonance.
Cognitive dissonance, the psychological term for a mind trying to hold two completely opposing truths as reality at the exact same time.
Yes. Leon Festinger introduced this theory in 1957. It's the intense psychological distress that occurs when your deeply held beliefs or attachments conflict violently with your objective reality.
So your brain is basically at war with itself.
Exactly. In an abusive or highly manipulative dynamic, your mind is facing an impossible, agonizing contradiction that threatens to tear your psyche apart. Thought A is, this person is my partner, they love me, and I have attached my survival to them.
Right.
And thought B is, this person is actively, intentionally harming me, lying to me, and dismissing my reality.
The brain literally cannot hold both of those thoughts. It feels like the system is going to break. It's like trying to drive a car with the gas pedal on the floor or the emergency brake fully engaged.
The tension is unbearable.
Oh.
So, to resolve the distress, the brain has to pick one thought to discard. And in a person conditioned to fawn, the brain almost always chooses self-deception over self-protection.
It protects the relationship over the self.
Yes. It creates complex rationalizations to explain away thought B. They're just under a lot of stress at work. I must have provoked them by using the wrong tone. I'm just being too sensitive, what they said.
Wow.
Jessica Pressler, a clinical social worker, calls this phenomenon the traitor within. Your own mind becomes an active accomplice to your abuser because acknowledging the objective truth of the abuse would require you to completely shatter your attachment to this person, which your nervous system equates with death.
The traitor within. That is a chilling phrase, but it is so accurate. You start reality switching on yourself. You lie awake at night having these exhausting, endless internal debates. Is it me or is it them? Am I the crazy one? Maybe I am demanding too much.
It's exhausting.
You know, logically they are hurting you, but the moment you try to leave, your brain floods you with memories of the good times, the breadcrumbs of affection, the promises of change. It feels like an addiction. Because chemically, that's exactly what is happening, right?
Chemically, it is identical to an addiction. It is a trauma bond. Your brain is reacting to a cycle of intermittent reinforcement. When the abuser is cruel, your cortisol spikes and you are in distress. When they offer a small, unpredictable kindness, an apology, a gift, a moment of warmth, your brain releases a massive flood of oxytocin and dopamine.
So it's a chemical roller coaster.
It is. The contrast between the terror and the relief makes the dopamine hit incredibly potent. You become chemically addicted to the cycle of rupture and appeasement. And this cycle is reinforced by the underlying fact that your parentified nervous system is fundamentally terrified of an unresolved rupture.
Which brings us to a concept that explains so much of this lingering pain, the unfinished loop, the neuroscience of limbic holding, and what happens when rupture and repair go wrong.
Humans are mammalian social creatures. We are biologically wired for rupture and repair. Disconnection, conflict, and misunderstanding happen in every single relationship. That is normal and inevitable.
Right, it's just part of being human.
Exactly. The trauma does not occur because of the rupture itself. The trauma occurs when the rupture is never repaired. Every time your body perceives an emotional harm or a break in connection, it opens a neurobiological loop. It goes into protection mode, it heightens your senses, and it waits. It waits for a signal of resolution, an apology, a moment of shared accountability, a return to truth, a hug.
And what happens if that signal never comes? What if the other person just refuses to acknowledge what happened?
The loop stays open. The nervous system stays primed for threat. The body physically stores the moment as unfinished business.
There is a story in the text from Christine Walter that illustrates this perfectly, and it doesn't even involve a romantic partner. It's about a man who had a major, painful falling out with his best friend of 20 years.
Oh, this is a heartbreaking example.
It really is. After months of silence, this man decided to take the high road. He wrote a deeply heartfelt, incredibly vulnerable email. He poured his heart out. He took accountability for his side of the mess. He expressed how much the friendship meant to him, and he asked for a conversation to repair things.
And he hit send.
He hit send, and he waited. And he never got a reply. No anger, no rejection, just absolute echoing silence. He told his therapist about this, and he said, it was 5 years ago. I've moved on. I don't even think about him anymore.
His conscious mind had moved on, but his body hadn't.
No, because his therapist noticed that every time this man tried to make a new friend, or every time a colleague invited him to get coffee, his chest would visibly tighten. He would hesitate to be honest in conversations. He was terrified to speak his truth or be vulnerable, constantly policing his own words until the moment of connection had passed. He truly believed he was fine, but his nervous system was still sitting at a computer 5 years ago, waiting for a reply to that email. The loop never closed.
That is limbic holding. The limbic system, the emotional center of the brain, needs completion to return to a resting state. When it doesn't get that completion, that unrepaired pain, that chronic bracing for rejection becomes your new baseline. You stop expecting to be understood. You preemptively suppress your truth because the vulnerability of reaching out feels too dangerous. And I think it's important to pause here and recognize how universal this is. More people carry both sides of this than you'd think.
It is so common. We are walking around a world filled with people whose bodies are holding open loops from 5, 10, 20 years ago, and it leads to this state of chronic, low-grade dysregulation. Your body is always slightly bracing for the drop. You are never fully relaxed. So the massive question is, how do we sit with this? How do we begin the practice of integration?
That is the work.
Because the goal here isn't to suddenly swing the pendulum, shut down, and become a callous jerk who doesn't care about anyone's feelings.
Right.
We don't want to lose our empathy. The goal is to remove the shame from the dysregulation.
Absolutely. The goal is not perfect, unflackable calmness. I think we have this highly toxic, deeply unhelpful idea in our modern wellness culture that emotional regulation means being a stoic Zen master who never gets upset, never raises their voice, and never feels anxious.
Like a robot.
Right. That is not regulation. That is often just dissociation or a highly polished fawn response. True emotional regulation is measured by something called vagal tone. Vagal tone is a measure of your nervous system's flexibility and resilience. It is your ability to shift into a necessary stress response when a challenge arises, feel the anger or the fear, and then gracefully return to a state of rest, safety, and connection once the threat has passed.
The return. That is the key.
Yes, the capacity for the return. Highly regulated people can look incredibly messy in the moment. They get intensely angry, they cry, they argue fiercely for what they need, but they don't stay stuck in the spiral. They don't hold grudges for decades. They know how to repair the rupture. They know how to come back to center.
That makes so much sense.
A mother who gets overwhelmed, yells at her kids, but 10 minutes later sits down, apologizes, and explicitly repairs the connection with her child is infinitely more regulated than the father who never raises his voice, never appears angry, but lives his entire life in a state of constant, frozen, emotional shutdown.
Because the calm father is just emotionally absent. He's in dorsal vagal collapse, and he's calling it peace. That is so incredibly validating to hear. It's not about never losing your balance on the tightrope. It's about knowing how to catch yourself and find your footing again.
Beautifully said.
And part of finding that footing, for the chronic people pleaser, is learning how to set boundaries without letting the resulting guilt completely destroy your resolve. Healing your fishing guilt. Hypnotherapy suggests this incredibly practical, paradigm-shifting exercise. They call it the 7-day log.
It is essentially a data collection exercise aimed at bypassing the emotional overwhelm. For 7 consecutive days, you don't change your behavior, you just track it. You write down every single time you say yes when your body desperately wants to say no.
Okay, so just paying attention.
Every time you feel that flash of resentment after agreeing to do a favor, you write down who asked, what the situation was, what your body felt like, and what internal story made you agree.
You are mapping the invisible cage. And when you finally transition from tracking to acting, when you actually start using those simple, terrifying scripts like, hey, that doesn't work for my schedule, or I don't have the capacity to take that on right now, you are going to be hit with a tidal wave of guilt.
Oh, a massive wave.
But the insight here, the thing that completely changes how you experience that guilt, is this. Guilt, When you are saying no to a boundary violation is not proof that you are doing something wrong. It is merely proof that you are breaking a deeply entrenched, multi-decade neural pattern.
Hmm.
It is temporary growing pains.
Your nervous system is sounding the alarm bells because you are doing something entirely unfamiliar. And to a traumatized, parentified nervous system, unfamiliar automatically equals dangerous.
Right.
You have to logically understand that the alarm is a false positive. You have to tolerate the physical sensation of the deal long enough to build the new neural pathway that says, I said no, and I did not die, and they did not die.
But if we don't build that pathway, if we refuse to tolerate the growing pains of the guilt, we inevitably end up taking one of the two relational exits. I want to dive deeply into a story about a woman named Nia from Annie Wright's clinical case files, because Nia represents the ultimate endpoint of this unchecked pattern.
Let's talk about Nia.
So Nia is 46 years old. She runs global operations for a massive logistics company. She is brilliant, capable, and has literally never missed a deadline in 14 years. She's the ultimate apex overfunctioner.
She has it all together. On paper.
On paper. But as the story goes, she is sitting in her therapist's office, arms tightly crossed, wearing her sharp work blazer, vibrating with tension because her husband of 15 years has just brought up the word divorce.
And it is vital to understand why he brought it up.
Exactly. He didn't bring it up because she doesn't do enough. He brought it up because she does everything. She manages the finances, the social calendar, the meal prep, his family's birthdays, the emotional climate of the house. Her husband sat in couples therapy and said, I treat every single problem in our marriage like it's mine to fix alone, and every time I try to step in and help, she has already handled it, managed it, and solved it before I can even finish my sentence. I feel completely useless. I'm married to a machine, not a partner.
That is so painful to hear.
And Nia, in a moment of sheer exhausted honesty, looked at her therapist and said, waiting for someone else to handle something feels like standing in the middle of a highway in oncoming traffic.
That sentence is the absolute tragedy of the parentified adult distilled into a dozen words. The tension of waiting for someone else to step up is physically intolerable to her.
Yeah.
And so we see the two exits. If you do not heal this, you will take one of two paths. Exit one is you manage everyone, like Nia. You recreate the childhood caretaking dynamic in every adult relationship because managing the other person is the only way your nervous system knows how to experience closeness and guarantee your own safety.
And what's the second exit?
Exit two is you avoid intimacy entirely. You manage no one, you isolate yourself, and you build walls 50 feet high because closeness has always, always meant a suffocating, soul-crushing amount of obligation.
Nia's whole nervous system was fundamentally trained by her childhood to believe that the phrase someone else is handling it is a category error. It's an impossibility. It simply does not compute in her reality. How on earth do you rewrite a biological script that is that deeply embedded?
You cannot just think your way out of it. You cannot read enough books or listen to enough analysis to fix it. You have to rewire it through experience, specifically through what attachment researchers call earned security.
Earned security.
To achieve earned security, you need a secure base. In a healthy childhood, a secure base is the reliable, regulated caregiver that a child can venture away from to explore the world and return to when they are frightened or distressed. If you didn't have that, if you as the 9-year-old were the secure base for your own parents, you have to actively build that dynamic in adulthood.
So you have to find that safe harbor.
Yes. It means intentionally cultivating and experiencing relationships with a therapist, a deeply trusted friend, or a self-aware partner, where you are explicitly, firmly not required to manage the other person's emotions. It is a space where you can drop the ball and the other person calmly picks it up without resenting you, where you can fall completely apart and the other person holds you, and you do not have to apologize for taking up space or being a burden.
It is terrifying for a chronic people pleaser to actually allow themselves to be held. It feels like taking off all your armor in the middle of a battlefield.
It is the most terrifying thing they can possibly do. It goes against every survival instinct they have ever developed. But having the visceral experience of dropping your guard and not being abandoned or punished is the only way to close the biological loop.
And as we move into the deeper connection here, how this very specific, very painful tension connects to the broader arc of our lives, it really comes down to this idea of purpose as a filter.
Let's dig into that.
Because underneath the exhaustion and the resentment, we are all just searching for identity and belonging. We want to know who we are and where we fit. But Dr. Margaretha Montague talks about something called the purpose paradox, which flips this entire dynamic on its head.
It is a beautiful, deeply challenging concept. When you are living your life out of a chronic fawn response, when your identity is built on being the ultimate accommodator, you are inevitably attracting relationships based on convenience, neediness, or mutual dysfunction.
You're drawing in people who need to be fixed.
You become a highly competent void filler for other people's anxieties, and you use their dependence on you as a void filler for your own lack of self-worth. You aren't connecting with people. You are collecting people who need you. Because being needed feels like a substitute for being loved.
It's the illusion of intimacy. But when you stop void filling, when you do the terrifying work of setting boundaries, when you actually start living authentically and standing in your own sovereign purpose, the paradox is that it makes a lot of people around you very uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely.
Your sudden authenticity acts as a glaring mirror to those who are still living inauthentically.
Exactly. When you step into your actual identity, your purpose acts as a relational tuning fork. When you begin to vibrate at your authentic frequency, you naturally and effortlessly attract people who harmonize with that energy.
Yeah.
And equally importantly, you automatically repel the energy drainers, the manipulators, and the people who only ever loved what you could do for them. The people who only liked the inauthentic, over-accommodating, fawning version of you will be angry and they will fall away. And that is not a tragedy. That is not a loss. That is a liberation.
But it requires something incredibly difficult. It requires what Sven Masterson calls the courage to disappoint.
The courage to disappoint.
You cannot have true, resonant intimacy if you are constantly managing your partner's anxiety. You simply can't. If you're always smoothing things over, biting your tongue, and anticipating their reactions, you are dating a performance, not a person. And they are dating a performance, not you. To find real connection, you have to stop performing peace and start practicing presence.
And practicing presence means having the fortitude to stand in your own truth, to tolerate the profound discomfort of their disappointment, and to remain emotionally available without collapsing back into compliance. It means being able to look at someone you care about and say, I see that you are upset by my boundary. I love you, and I am still making this choice for myself.
That takes so much strength.
Because the pain of conflict isn't the actual problem in these relationships. Isolation in the pain is the problem. When you hide your true self, your true needs, and your true exhaustion just to keep a false peace, you are profoundly isolating yourself inside your own relationship. You are entirely alone in a crowded room.
It's the ultimate both and of your personal history. You look back at that parentified child, the 9-year-old managing the chaotic ecosystem, the adult carrying the invisible backpack, and the truth is, you became extraordinary.
You really did.
You became hyper-competent. You became deeply empathetic. You became highly intuitive, able to read the subtle weather of the world in a way most people can't even fathom. You became incredibly resilient because of what you survived. And today, at the exact same time, you were never supposed to carry it alone. A 9-year-old was never supposed to be the load-bearing wall for an entire family. Both of those things are true.
And acknowledging the truth of both of those things is the essence of integration. You do not have to throw away your empathy, your deep capacity for care, or your competence. You get to keep the strength you forged in that fire. But you are absolutely allowed to put down the debt. You are allowed to stop paying an emotional toll that was never rightfully yours to owe in the first place.
So we've looked at this from both sides today. We've looked deeply at the felt relational desire to just love the people in your life, to be reliable, and to keep them safe from the chaos of the world. And we've looked at the biological, psychological reality of a nervous system that is trapped in an old, exhausting survival loop, trying desperately to protect you from a threat that has already passed.
And we are not declaring a winner here. We aren't saying the biology invalidates the love. Both lenses are true, and they exist simultaneously. The desire to care for others is a beautiful, necessary, pro-social human trait. But the need to protect the self, to maintain a sovereign, intact identity, is a fundamental biological imperative. Holding both of these truths at the same time, without letting one consume the other, is a lifelong, delicate balancing act.
It really is. There's this profound, undeniable beauty in being a safe harbor for the people you love, to be the steady person they can come to when the storm hits and the world falls apart. But there is an absolute non-negotiable necessity to finally become a safe harbor for yourself, to let yourself come in from the rain, put down the wrench of the hammer, and just rest.
And as you do that, we have to honor the brilliant, fierce loyalty of your nervous system. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. It kept you alive and safe in the past when things were chaotic, overwhelming, and unpredictable. It was your greatest protector. But now, as an adult, building a safe life, we must realize how gently, how patiently, and how consistently that nervous system must be taught that the war is over, that you are finally safe enough to rest.
If this conversation felt true for you, both sides of it, you're always welcome here. You can subscribe to Leone Patterns and keep sitting with us. Same pace, same questions. See you then.